What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Go ahead and call on in, share your ideas and opinions with us. Now, Conservative Tribune is reporting that the House of Representatives have passed a new bill, the Veterans Second Amendment Protection Act, which, if signed into law, would protect the due process rights of military veterans. Remember, under the Obama administration, as part of the gun grabber agenda, they were out there with this idea that anybody who'd served in armed combat by default was suffering PTSD and mental illness, and therefore they would not be allowed to continue to have their right to keep and bear arms. And it was a very specific targeting of a segment of our society, because if it comes to a conflict between the American people and the government, those veterans represent an already trained military force who in all probability would side with the American people. So this was a blatant attempt to preemptively disarm them, as if other gun owners would not share their weapons with them, but that's what it was about. So the House of Representatives has passed this bill saying that just because you're a military veteran does not mean you are not protected by that Second Amendment. I think that's a very, very good thing. The PC people are at it again. Over at Boston's Emerson College, they have come out with a list of words you should stop using at once. We're going to teach you Newspeak. If you ever read 1984, the logic behind Newspeak was that if there was not a word for a thought that was not approved by the government, you couldn't think it because you didn't have the word. And that was the rationale behind Newspeak. And they're headed this way. Emerson College has just released their guidelines for inclusive language, which says you must not use the word homosexual when you're referring to a homosexual. Don't you dare use the word disabled. That's offensive. Use person with a disability. Use gay or lesbian when describing people who are attracted to members of the same sex. Avoid the use of homosexual and homosexual relationship. That's bad. That's bad. Now, the guide does not provide any rationale for these rules. It's 1,440-word guide saying you will not use these words. They banned the use of the word businessman. They say you should use business executive. They're also banning cameraman. They're saying instead of using the word chairman, just say it's a chair, which is going to cause confusion when people try and sit on them. Also banned policeman, man-made, mankind, layman, spokesman, manpower. And it's pretty ridiculous. Campus Reform reached out to Emerson officials for background, and nobody replied. By the way, the cost to endure this brainwashing at Emerson is just under $60,000 per year. And I'm sure there's a banker there who will offer you a very, very easy access to a student loan. Emerson has produced people like Jay Leno and Henry Winkler, famous for jumping the shark, and I think Emerson just did that himself. Rather interesting story. Boy, Donald Trump promised to bring back jobs, and he certainly did. One area that is really booming right now is the tattoo removal business. Apparently, gangbangers are so afraid of deportation that they're going to places and having their tattoos removed so they can't be spotted. Remember, we were talking about how in Philadelphia they're canceling Cinco de Mayo. They're afraid of deportations. And I think that comes under the guise of harboring or protecting illegal immigrants. It's a Title VIII violation. Now, Monsanto's in serious trouble again. A recent lawsuit has forced the public disclosure of previously secret documents. And quite a few things have come on out there. Part of the records indicate Monsanto was ghostwriting research papers that were attributed to academics. In other words, Monsanto would produce a report that said, GMO is great, glyphosate is great, how could you not love it? And then they would find some academic striving for tenure and say, just take this, we're going to save you a lot of research money here, just take this, sign your name to it, get it published. And that's how they would get these reports out there claiming that glyphosate was perfectly safe. And this has become a very common industry practice to the point where there have been studies saying that as much as 1/3 of these supposedly peer-reviewed scientific papers appearing in journals are junk. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And apparently a senior official at the Environmental Protection Agency colluded with Monsanto to quash a review of glyphosate that was going to be conducted by the United States Department of Health and Human Services. In other words, the Health and Human Services Department was going to run their own independent study on whether glyphosate was safe, and the EPA and Monsanto colluded to keep that from happening. Apparently, according to some of these records, there was even a disagreement in the EPA over whether glyphosate was safe. There were apparently a lot of people in the EPA said, you can't do this. It isn't safe. So, apparently, Monsanto Company Representative William Hayden's suggests the company ghostwrite findings would be keeping the cost down by us doing the writing, and they would just edit and sign their names. So even academic research has been turned into just another advertising platform. Now here's an interesting story that's coming on up. This is coming on out of Giza Death Star, and there is some merit to this. It's going to sound a little wild, but it does have merit. And it's asking if the U.S. government helped pressure Pope Benedict XVI to resign. Remember when Pope Benny the Rat quit and everybody was scratching their head saying, what the heck's going on? And so apparently some documents that were released by WikiLeaks indicate that Pope Benny abdicated under highly unusual circumstances and was replaced by a pope whose apparent mission is to provide a spiritual component to the radical ideological agenda of the international left, in other words, the globalists. And the new pope has certainly been supporting the globalists, hasn't he? Now, the new pope may not be all he seems to be either, because looking back at his background, this is from Global Research up in Canada, apparently, even though he's being heralded as a progressive pope by anti-war activists, Pope Francis was one of the main supporters within the Catholic hierarchy of Argentina's military dictatorship, which was brought to power in a CIA-supported coup in 1976. So the question is the Pope a CIA asset? And again, given his statements in support of globalism and opposition to populism, he came out with some really extreme stuff in the last couple of weeks about how populism is bad and you should embrace the one world government and, of course, the one world church. Did I mention it would be Catholic? Now, here in Hawaii, we're still dealing with this light rail system, and the story just goes from bad to worse. As I mentioned before, the construction is way behind schedule. It's very expensive. The roads along the rail line are in a terrible state of repair. It's causing a lot of damage to cars. People are now avoiding that way, which is adding to congestion in other routes. We live in a very odd part of the island where we are kind of constrained to a very narrow piece of land to get from where we are out to the western side of the island. And there are really only a couple of roads, one a freeway, that will get us out there, but they're all congested by this construction. Now, at this point, this is the litany of failures. Besides being way over budget, way behind schedule, they are going to probably have to replace all of the rail cars, because after they bought them, they have discovered that these rail cars, which are aluminum, the frames, which consist of 4 extruded aluminum I-beams, are cracked and deficient. And apparently it's turned out it's less expensive to simply trash these and buy brand new ones with stronger frame members than to try and take these apart and retroactively put the new frames in. So that's strike one. They have discovered that the insulating pads that have the tracks resting on them on the top of the column, they are already starting to fail. And they're already scheduled for replacement for the first 11 miles of the route and probably eventually the entire thing. Some of the track sections, the pre-stressing has already failed. That's had to be replaced. And now here is the new one. At certain locations along the light rail system, there are obviously going to be stations where you get on and get off the light rail trains. And Claire and I had noticed a while back, one of the stations is supposed to be down here by the Pearl Ridge Mall, and we'd noticed the columns going up and the beams going out to hold the rail station, and then all of a sudden it just seemed to stop. And now we're finding out why. Apparently, when the contract for those columns and those supports for the rail stations went on out, they hadn't really finalized the design for the rail stations themselves. And so these columns have been built, columns and supports, were built to support a rail station that was going to weigh X. And now that that rail station design has been finalized, they've discovered it's actually going to weigh a whole lot more. It's going to weigh more than the current structure is designed to support. So they're going to have to redo all of those. And they're out there pointing fingers and saying that obviously the contracts for those supports for the rail stations went out prematurely. Should have waited. Yes, they should have. But I'm sure somebody was eager to get their little political payback done as quickly as possible. Here is the real kicker. They're now saying that the light rail system will not be operational until December of 2025, and even then they are hemming and hawing about it. That means that we have a light rail system here that is going to be another 7 years of just sitting there with the salt air corrosion and the effects of time and weathering without maintenance, without trains running on it. This has turned out to be an absolute disaster and a boondoggle. And it was, of course, it was being pushed forward by the Agenda 21 people, and they're behind schedule because they've renamed it Agenda 30. We're going to ban cars. We're going to put you in these cattle trains and just move you where we need you to go. And when you have a mass transportation system that is well designed and integral to the city, it does tend to work. The one in Munich works really well. The one in Sydney, Australia works really well. New York, okay. But this thing is spread out across the southern side of the island, and for the vast majority of people who actually live here, getting from our homes up here in, like, the hills, down to the station for the light rail, that's a problem. They don't have parking spaces down there where you can drive down. I assume that there's going to be some kind of bus service, but it's going to wind up being more trouble to use than most people are going to want to deal with. This entire light rail system seems geared to shuffling tourists from Waikiki out to the Disney Resort at Colina. And there's a few stops along the way, basically the shopping malls. And that seems to be it. We know that another one of the agendas behind the plan is that downtown Honolulu is very heavily congested with businesses. Some years ago, the state of Hawaii, or actually the county of Honolulu, decided to set up a business incubator in a city out there toward the west called Kapolei. And it has been sitting more or less empty since then, partly because there's a very long drive to get out there on the H1, and the H1 has never been enlarged to deal with the increasing amount of traffic. And traffic jams on the H1 are notoriously horrible. So a big part of the light rail is to try and encourage people who are currently doing business in Honolulu to relocate their businesses out to Kapolei. I don't know how well that's going to work, but we'll see. But one thing is very obvious at this point. This government-planned mass transportation system, which was done to be in conformance with this agenda for mass transportation and getting people out of cars, it's a miserable failure at this point. It is an absolute miserable failure. Your tax dollars at work, your government at work. Go ahead and call on in, 800-313-9443. I'm running out of things to talk about, and I need some ideas coming in from our listeners. We have another nuclear reactor problem, like Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima was not enough. Apparently, over in India, the Kakrapur Atomic Power Station has now had an emergency shutdown. Apparently, a year ago, they had a heavy water leak from the coolant channel in Unit 1. Reading between the lines, it sounds like it was a primary coolant leak, which is always a very, very serious situation. And they patched it up and they cranked the reactor back up. Now they've discovered, they're calling it smallpox. But what it is they're discovering that the heavy water has triggered corrosion spots on the outside of that primary cooling loop and through the wall cracks as well. So it's a serious, serious situation. I don't think they're going to start that reactor up again. Okay, we actually have a caller on the line. Pat from Vietnam. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello.
You're on the air.
Hey, Mike. A long-time listener. Really love your show. You've said a couple things. I don't quite think you have your finger exactly on the pulse in regards to Asia. There's actually 3 groups of disputed islands. You have the Senkaku Islands, which is the dispute between China and Japan, and those are in the East China Sea.
Yes.
And those were given away by the treaties at the end of World War II. But you have the Spratlys and the Paracels, which are the ones that are off the coast of Vietnam and kind of between Vietnam and the Philippines. Now, those islands, if I remember correctly, were specifically left out of the treaty at the end of World War II. Mm-hmm. And the biggest flashpoint in the region there is that those islands are sitting on top of $4 trillion worth of oil and gas at today's prices.
Mm-hmm.
And China has unilaterally drawn what they call the 9-dash line, which they've claimed the entire area, going all the way to the coasts of Malaysia, the Philippines, Brunei, and Vietnam. And they have basically said, this is ours. We won't allow anyone else in. And they've started militarizing reefs there. Vietnam actually is quite happy with the United States pivot to Asia policy because they see this as just Chinese aggression, and they would be really happy for the United States to come in and be working with them. In fact, they've already allowed U.S. ships to start making port calls here and have started cooperating with the U.S. military on drills.
Okay.
I just wanted to call in and kind of give you that little bit of information because it's the Senkaku Islands. You have China making these territorial claims, but there's a significant difference in the geographic location between the claims that they're making against South Korea and Japan and the claims that they're making in the South China Sea.
Well, you know, what's really interesting, and I'm going to have to let you go because we're on a commercial break, I remember when Vietnam was being made war over, there were reports of massive oil and gas off the coast, and then it turned out it wasn't really there, and that was another reason why the U.S. just pulled the plug and left that.
They discovered it. Mobile discovered it in 1971, but they had to plug the hole and leave, so they never actually got to the point of extracting it.
All right. Well, thank you for the update, Pat. We got to let you go and take a break for commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I was looking at the email. Somebody wrote on in and said it took less time for the Egyptians to build the pyramids than for Hawaii to build its light rail system. Well, they probably had a lot more bodies working on that. Anyway, back to the phones. Gaither in Oklahoma. I hope I pronounced that correctly. What's on your mind?
Yeah, it's Gaither. It's all right.
Gaither.
Anyway, Mike, I was calling to tell you about the Oroville. I used to be from Northern California years ago, and all my friends are out here in Oklahoma. Oh, we're going to go to the Gold Rush.
Yes.
Out there in California, heck, we're going to get an RV, and we're all going out going, you guys don't realize nothing. I said, first of all, if you did find any gold, you have to go to the assayer's office. They find out exactly, they can tell within a half a mile where you got it from almost nowadays.
Yes.
And then you have to have permits, you have to have a state licenses, you have to have a claim. You can't just go buy it. You can sell it to a jeweler for maybe half price, you know what I mean? But people don't have a clue about this gold deal at all. It's all run around just picking it up off the ground.
Yeah, it doesn't work like that anymore. I mean, when the U.S. wanted to lure populations out to California, they just said, yeah, go on out, file a claim, get rich. None of them, very few actually did. But I think it was shortly after the Depression of the 1930s, California passed a law simply declaring that all of the mineral wealth in the ground by default belong to the government. Now, there are areas designated in California for recreational gold panning where you can legally pan for gold and you can keep what you find there. There's not a lot there because everybody's been panning the area, but I remember when Claire and I were still living in that part of California, following an earthquake, any kind of a significant quake, we'd go up and we'd go gold panning because a lot of new stuff would be shaken down from inside the mountains. And we did a little gold panning, and part of the gold that we came up with is in Claire's wedding ring because I'm a cheap bastard. But Claire's laughing. But there are areas in California where you can pan recreational for the history, and you're not going to get rich on that. But yes, in point of fact, you cannot just walk on any piece of property in California and start mining or panning for gold. You have to have the permission of the property owner, and under California law, any significant amount of gold that you find is subject to capital gains tax.
Yeah, if you started muddying the creeks up there and the main rivers, they'd have SWAT teams helicoptering in and shooting everybody. Yeah, I mean, they'd freak out and put a dredge on a creek without all these permits. Yeah, well,
like I said,
I tell everybody, don't think about running out there and being some gold miner. It ain't going to happen. That's really a stupid idea. No,
California's just gone totally nuts, and Claire and I loved it when we lived there, and we're still trying to find some way we can get back to the mainland this year. But California is definitely off the list of places where we're going to settle, unless some giant media corporation offers me a huge amount of money and says, well, you're going to have to come use our studio in Los Angeles. But outside of that fairy tale, no, California is definitely off the list of places we want to go to.
All right, well, I'll just let you go. I just want to get a kick out of all these people on the web and everybody. California, gold rush, yeah. Well, you got $1,000 a week to set an RV in somebody's yard that goes there. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's crazy. Anyway, I'll let you go, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. I hadn't actually heard that. I mean, I know that they were talking about how this flooding in Central California, especially the runoff from that Oroville Dam, had exposed some new gold deposits. And I'm sure there's still a lot of gold down there. But yeah, you can't just go onto somebody's property and help yourself. But there are designated recreational gold panning areas where you can take your gold pan, and you're not allowed to do water cannons or sluice boxes or anything, but you can take an historic gold pan and you can go pan for gold. And yes, you can find little small amounts of it, enough to where you can say, look, I found gold. But you're not going to get rich that way. All right, let's go to Nick in Southern California. Aloha, Nick. I'm going to have to take you through the next commercial break. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I spent the day at the dentist. My face is numb, and I had some amalgam removed. You had mentioned a couple of days ago where there was a report about amalgam. Do you remember talking about that?
Oh, yeah, that's been an issue for quite a few years, where the mercury amalgam material used in dental fillings is toxic and can cause neurological damage. Stay on the line. We've got to do a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Nick in Southern California about the dangers of mercury amalgam dental fillings. They're very popular because they're easy to work with from the point of view of the dentist. And the problem, of course, is mercury is a neurotoxin. And in your upper teeth, it's basically an inch from your brain, and it is known to cause problems. Now, the 47 nations of the Council of Europe have passed a resolution calling on all their member nations to start restricting or prohibiting the use of mercury amalgams as dental fillings. Now, the dentist likes to call them silver fillings, because, oh, it's silver, I feel really special. But the amalgams are mostly mercury, and there's actually very little silver mixed in with it. And it is constantly venting mercury vapor into your mouth, and dental fillings are the main source of human exposure to mercury in the United States right now. And so there does need to be a pushback on it, and more and more people are, in fact, getting their mercury amalgam fillings removed and replaced with one of the new substitutes. But it is a real problem, and it's another reminder that just because somebody who is a doctor says this is good for you, they don't always know what they're talking about.
You know, it's funny you should say that, because when I approached the dentist with that, I explained that I'd heard about toxicity, and she says, there's no scientific proof that it's toxic, and so on and so forth, and you just can't trust these people because they're wearing a white coat.
Well, medical school, even dental school, it's all about indoctrinating them to sell the product, sell the product, sell the product. And I remember years ago, Claire and I had a brief friendship with a woman that we were trying to sort of help her through the suicide of her husband, and she was a nurse, and just in the course of conversation, we were talking about these issues of mercury and vaccines and everything, and she got immediately defensive, just locked up and said, oh, vaccines are good for you. And, at that point, we started to drift away from her. But the whole process of getting a degree or a license is to swear undying loyalty to whatever piece of propaganda you were educated with. And that constrains, progress in identifying and dealing with these. Large corporations don't want to change their product line. It involves added expense to get rid of one product and replace it with something else. They don't want to do that. They want to go on selling the product as long as they can, even when they find out it's actually harmful.
Well, I have a degree, and before I went to college, my grandfather, a very elderly Southern man now, 95 years old, he said, son, you go to that college, and you nod your head when that professor speaks, and you do what you have to do to get that degree, but you go on believing what you know is right and think your own way.
Boy,
and I did take that to heart.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's very, very good advice.
Yeah, it's I kind of had to cross my fingers behind my back when I got my my diploma there for graduation. I did want to mention a little bit more about the amalgam, and then one brief note at the end here. But my girlfriend is very in tune with all these things. The vaccinations, the mercury, the poisons in the environment. And if you're going to have amalgams removed, like I did, there's a whole process to it. And basically, you don't want to just go have a dentist drill, because that will actually vaporize the mercury. You may already know that.
Yeah.
But they have a special vacuum. The dentists wear masks. They have a dental dam that they put to avoid anything from going in, to your system. And they also have a high pressure vacuum to keep any of the contaminants from penetrating your body in any way. So if it's going to be done, make sure you do it right.
Yes, I agree.
And the last thing is, there's a movie from a long time ago. I want to say it's a black and white movie made in France, and it's called Alphaville. Have you seen it?
No, I have not.
It's a classic movie. I'll see if I can get you a link to it, or maybe I'll send you a copy. The book that I sent you is on its way. It shipped yesterday.
Oh, okay. I look forward to it.
Yeah, the book written by my uncle about economics. It's called Inclined to Liberty. I hope you enjoy it. Alphaville, you can hunt it down, and basically it's a dystopian future, and a computer essentially runs society, and they break down that computer, and everybody flips out, and it's really neat. What do you call it? It's a film noir.
Yeah.
And it's an allegory to what's going on right now. It's enjoyable in a certain way.
Yeah, with our luck, the global computer controlling us all is going to be running Windows 10 or even Millennium Edition. Oh, my goodness. All right, well, listen, Nick, thank you very much for the information and the updates here. We're going to switch over to Bregan in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mr. Rivero. I have a few questions and a couple of comments on, number one, your sign-off generally that I appreciate that everyone should really pay attention to is make good choices.
Yes.
Which I always kind of agree with and is a daily reminder when I'm privileged to actually be listening to your show and not working. And then also your point of one of your few laments in life, which is not having procreated and having kids, and I agree with that. I'm in the same boat, and I would encourage anyone who is of child-rearing age, if one has a trusted confidant in their mate, to procreate if they can and not be fearful of what they may view as a coming smackdown of liberties and overbearing society. Go forth with that and don't worry about it. Teach your children well and probably don't have too many second thoughts, because if you're doing the correct things and you surround yourself with good people, I think that you'll be okay. Those are just two minor points, but I have some questions for you, and another comment is, any of your listeners who, I would like to hear you back on Coast to Coast with George Norrie, because you have insightful and very prescient breakdowns of contemporary issues of the day and past and future, and that just being one thing you can, we can all text. There's a text. There's a way to contact the show via their producers via text. If you just look up coasttocoastam.com and look up text, we'd love to have you back on the show. Now to the questions. There is a program out there considering, I think it's a vaccine day of action, I believe it is. There are people via naturalnews.com. I don't mean to, I'm not trying to promote any other website, but there's, it was announced by Revolution for Truth. I don't have the URL on me right now. And there's also a World Mercury Project. So that's coming up on the 30th of March. And I would encourage anyone to look that up via their favorite search engine. I recommend startpage.com, and find out a way to lobby your own senators and Congress critters to make acknowledgement of that. And also, I haven't heard you bring it up because there's probably not enough information out there right now that's verifiable, and that's probably why you haven't brought it up. But that Project Hammer, involving Clapper and other people, that may be an off-site computer program, computer network, that is basically data mining and consuming a bunch of information via non-globalist or of non-globalist actors such as yourself.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. That's always the safe assumption here. All right. Well, listen. Let me cut you here because there's a bunch of stuff going on back. First of all, Startpage is a great website. Unfortunately, they actually use the Google system. They're sort of a wrapper around it. So while Startpage is going to protect your privacy and not collect your information, you're still going to get the filtered, biased, skewed results from Google. I definitely am using DuckDuckGo and Yandex these days. Now, as far as the NSA's collection of data, there's absolutely no question they're continuing to do it. The real issue is how effectively can they actually find anything in there? Because addition of computer data to a database is linearly additive, but correlating amongst all that data, that's an unlimited expansion. Now, I'm sure that for people who are targeted ahead of time, you know, their information is being shoved off into a separate little file to be looked at. But as far as the ability of this system to actually listen to everybody on Earth and find indications of a terror plot from somebody who is not on any of the watch lists to begin with, that I really seriously do not think they're able to do. Okay?
And you have always espoused the point of nothing is private. Believe me, I have it from other sources, just leave it at that, other sources that nothing is, oh, you're going to love this, super secret squirrel. That's a code term. When you say that specific term, nothing is sacred, nothing is private unless you are doing preconceived end-to-end encryption that you have already set up, such as you have already talked about in the past. The other
well, let me stop you there. Let me stop you there. I got one more comment, and then we're going to let you go because we got another caller waiting, and I've really given you a lot of time here. The best way to conceal communication is to put it someplace where it's not obvious it's communication, and that gets us back to a practice called steganography, which is concealing a message in the low order bits of, for example, an image or an audio file where the low order bits are going to be perceived as noise, but not necessarily giving it away that there is in fact meaningful data there. And I can't even remember when I did this. I think it was back when I was still living in Southern California, which means it's 20 years ago. I embedded, using a steganographic system, I embedded a quote from Shakespeare in one of the images of the original Rancho Runamukka site, and I challenged the spooks to identify the image and decode the quote. Nobody ever has. The fact of the matter is the real criminals and the real terrorists are going to evade the NSA, the FBI, and the CIA, and there's not a thing they can do about it. All they can do is watch all of us, and that's obviously what they have been doing.
And can I ask you one more question, and it regards fracking?
Yes.
When we consider, okay, I live on a certain particular artesian water system that comes from the Montana, Wyoming, and Dakota's system that flows over time down to Wisconsin and other states. When fracking is being done with this ostensibly benign fracking fluid, no one buys that for a New York minute, but over time I think that private wells will be poisoned, and being that water is the new gold, or ostensibly going to be the new gold of the future, and you have the Bush family buying over 600 hectares of the most primo water near Iguazu Falls in South America, on the border of Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. Do you think that there is a secondary objective of making water a scarce resource?
Well, we certainly know that the CEO of Nestle thinks water should not be a natural right, but should be commoditized and force you to pay for it. And then somebody will think, well, you have no natural right to oxygen either, so we're going to charge you an air fee every month. I think this rush to turn water into a new, expensive, profitable commodity is going to backfire, because apparently there have been some new developments in the area of desalinization. Apparently this science student came up with an absolutely brilliant approach. Instead of trying to extract the fresh water from salt water, he came on out and said, I'm going to extract the salt. And what's left behind is the water. And he extracted the salt, and some of the water comes with it, but what remains is fresh drinking water. And apparently it's a very simple, inexpensive process. And I think at the point where somebody comes up with a very inexpensive mass desalinization system, there will be ample fresh water from the oceans, and all of this attempt to control and monopolize water for a fast buck is going to fall flat on its face. I mean, the whole idea is right out of the movie Quantum of Solace.
Correct. And just in parting, I think that also there's an ability, if the air quality is is good enough, which in certain regions is questionable. But where I live, it's just fine. You can extract plenty of water out of the air. There are different systems which do that. But I think that water being the most plentiful resource besides oxygen on the planet, I think that initiative to control water may fall flat on its face.
I agree. You can get water with solar stills. There was a project that was set up down on the Big Island where they were pumping up ultra-cold water from the bottom of the ocean and using it to just condense fresh water right out of the air. We have a lot of humidity here, and then pump the water back down to the bottom of the ocean. And they were able to produce plenty of fresh water right from the very humid air near the coastlines here in Hawaii. So there are means of doing it that basically say that, yes, this attempt to monopolize and commoditize drinking water, ultimately it's doomed to fail because people will push on back unless we're living under a global dictatorship that says you will not make your own water, just like in some places they're now saying you will not grow your own food, you will buy everything you need from a corporation, and of course that sort of attitude is what led to the American Revolution. All right, Bregan, I'm going to let you go here because we're coming up on our last commercial break of the day. We got another phone call that I'm going to get into during that last segment. Before we hit that commercial break, though, apparently the £1 million inquiry into child abuse by ex-Prime Minister Edward Heath is now declared closed due to a lack of evidence, but the report on the investigation's finding will remain classified. Can you say cover-up, children? I knew you could. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Last segment of our program today and last phone call of the day. Jesse in Ohio. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How you doing today?
Doing fine.
Well, I was just driving around down here. I'm bored. And I listened to your last caller. He was talking about education, and I'm here on a college campus, and it's spring break. There's nothing going on, but I thought I'd give you, if you've got any college-age listeners, I thought I'd give them some advice for the upcoming finals. I hear that if you sit on your hand for 15 minutes before you take a test, it feels like somebody else is disappointing your parents.
I love it.
Well, yeah, that's all. I was just being silly. I had nothing else to do.
Well, it's funny. It's a funny joke. I like that. All right, well, listen, Jesse, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. And, yeah, it is spring break. I guess down at all the resorts are all those bikini-clad girls and young men out there having fun. And apparently a lot of them are using their student loan money to do that, which strikes me as ill-advised when they discover down the road just how much that spring break vacation is going to cost them. It's almost like it's become a fashion statement. Spring break, you go to Cancun, you go to wherever, and all the rest of that. All right, listen, somebody just wrote in an email saying that in Oklahoma, the state owns the sunshine and the wind, because if you put up solar panels, you must pay a tax on them to the state. If you have a windmill generating electricity, you have to pay a tax to the state. This is like all of these various states that now say they own the rain. And if the rain falls on your property and you collect it for your use, you are fined. And that shows you just how far into tyranny and dictatorship this country has descended when the dictator says the sunlight is mine, the wind is mine, the water is mine, and if you need anything, you will buy it from my favorite corporations. Even though we're taking away all your jobs. It really is an unworkable system. They're in a real corner, and nobody wants to acknowledge it because everybody wants to duck the blame for having allowed it to happen in the first place. But it is a bit of a mess. Now, apparently, Big Alcohol is lobbying against legalization of marijuana because already a quarter of beer drinkers have switched to smoking marijuana. And the beer makers are just screaming that their profits are under threat from all this legalized pot. We must push back. You're not allowed to get buzzed on something you can grow in your backyard. You will buy your buzz from us. That's the mindset. You're not allowed to provide for yourself. You are forced to be dependent on corporations and the government, and dependency is slavery. And you need to remember that. That's the driving force. Keep you dependent, and you are under their control. So, anyway, we're coming up here on the top of the hour and the end of the show. So we will be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with everybody that you know. And we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.